Hello, folks. We'll get started in very shortly, just waiting for folks to join in to our live panel discussion today. All right, looks like folks are joining in. We'll get started. Tishtale, salam, and sambatkanu, everybody. Today is February 21st, marking the International Mother Language Day, a UNESCO-introduced observance to promote awareness of linguistic cultural diversity and promote multilingualism. It is a day to celebrate one's mother tongue, but the reality for Tibetans inside of Tibet, Uyghurs in East Turkestan, and Mongolians in Southern Mongolia is far from a celebration, as the Chinese government deploys one of its most insidious tactics aimed to eradicate the whole of identity, attacking our languages and its continuity by targeting our children, the next generation, the future of our nations. So today, on behalf of Tibet Action Institute, Students for Free Tibet, Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center, Uyghur American Association, we bring you this live panel to get a full picture of how China is right now, as we speak, ripping children from their roots with their system of colonial boarding schools inside of Tibet, East Turkestan, and in Southern Mongolia. My name is Jimmy Lamo. I'll be your moderator for this expert panel today. And without further ado, let's bring on introduce our expert panel for their introductory remarks, followed by an open discussion with your question and answers. So we'll start off by Ladun Tedonla, the director of Tibet Action Institute, who is an award-winning activist, a leader in the Tibetan freedom movement, who has been organizing and strategizing for almost all her life. Since 2009, she co-founded Tibet Action Institute with a vision of combining cutting-edge technology with strategic nonviolence to design strategies and carry out innovative programs that advance human rights and freedom inside of Tibet. Without further ado, Adaladna, your stage is yours. 5 minutes. Introductory remarks.
Great. Thank you very much, Chimila, for hosting this and organizing. And getting right to why we're here. A few years ago, my colleagues and I at Tibet Action, we wanted to understand better what was happening in Tibet in terms of language rights. Every day, news was coming out of fewer and fewer spaces that Tibetans could speak Tibetan language, even and learn in Tibetan and use Tibetan just in sort of day-to-day life. And we saw a crackdown on Tibetans in a way that really led to a complete, for us, just the need, the desire to do some kind of language rights campaign in the international community to draw attention to this issue in Tibet. What we didn't know at that time was that we were walking into a completely new, massive issue that would come to sort of take over all of our lives. And that was, we sort of stumbled upon through a Tibetan researcher, as we looked into the schooling policy and we looked into what was happening on the ground, we stumbled upon the fact that 1 million Tibetan children nearly were in residential boarding schools. So the Chinese government had placed what was now we know as at least 3 out of every 4 Tibetan children into a system of residential boarding schools where they not only do not get to learn in Tibetan language, so the medium of instruction is Mandarin, but where they are separated from their parents and their families and their entire Tibetan communities, traditional communities, from as young as age 4. So there are even boarding preschools for children ages 4 to 6. And this was I'm Tibetan, Canadian, born and raised in Canada on Vancouver Island. And this, for me and for some of my Canadian colleagues especially, really was such a disturbing sort of discovery, because the issue of residential boarding schools in Canada and the way that they were used as a tool to systematically eliminate Indigenous, First Nations identity, language, culture, community, nations, that it was just so apparent to us that, though in some different ways, and the situations are not exactly the same, that this was what the Chinese government was trying to do in Tibet, and that Tibetans were really suffering because of it. We were hearing, despite a near total information blackout on Tibet, and the fact that China's essentially closed the borders. You can't get in, you can't get out. There's no foreign media or free media allowed in Tibet, and Tibetans outside are threatened, and even living in freedom, too worried, scared of the repercussions of family inside, that they won't speak out freely and even tell the stories of what's happening inside. So we had a very unclear picture, but we did our best to investigate. We released a report, and really, I think the findings were quite shocking for even those of us in the Tibetan International Tibet movement and the exile Tibetan community, because China had really built this system quite effectively and efficiently under Xi Jinping since 2012, and we sort of came upon the reality that our entire future generation of young Tibetans, now we know more than 80% of all Tibetans in all of historical Tibet, not just in the Tibet Autonomous Region, which is what China calls Tibet, but it's actually just central and western Tibet, but in all of Tibet, historical Tibet, all three provinces, that the vast majority of nearly our entire generation of children and youth now live separated from their families in a highly coercive system of residential boarding schools that are intended to eliminate Tibetan traditional culture, language, identity. And this is very much in keeping with Xi Jinping's entire plan to, I think, what China calls ethnic minorities, but for us, our peoples, our nations, Tibetans, Uyghurs, Southern Mongolians, this is part of a bigger plan to wipe out our resistance, wipe out what makes us strong and what makes us different from Chinese and China, is our language, our culture, our identity, our national blueprint. And that is what Xi Jinping seeks to eliminate, so as to eliminate any threat of resistance or any threat to the authority of the Chinese Communist Party. And so this residential school system in Tibet, this colonial boarding school system, is not, it threatens the very existence of Tibet. And we are not so far along. We still have time to fight it. And we can see with our Uyghur brothers and sisters and our Southern Mongolian brothers and sisters that there is a lot we can do together to fight it, to bring this to the international community and international community's attention, and to put a spotlight on what China doesn't want the world to see. And so that's why we're doing this panel and this discussion, and we'll be doing a lot more in the future. And I'll just stop there as a brief introduction to where we are now with Tibet.
Thank you. Next up, I'd like to bring up on our stage here Ingabatu Togochotla, who's born in Southern Mongolia, currently the director of Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center that was established by him and his colleagues in 2001, a New York-based human rights organization that is dedicated to promoting and protecting the rights of Mongolian people in Southern Mongolia. Alongside being the director, he's also the chief editor of the organizational newsletter called Southern Mongolia Watch. He's testified in many international platforms, including European Parliament, the United Nations platforms, and has actually also translated The Way Out of Southern Mongolia and the Genocide of Mongolian Steppe. So without further ado, Ingabatu, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So, regarding the colonial boarding school system, colonial boarding school system started in Southern Mongolia since the day one of the Chinese colonial regime that was established in, excuse me, in 1949. But as the Chinese policies of ecological migration and urbanization intensified in Southern Mongolia, especially starting the 2000, early 2000, thousands of rural Mongolian schools were either eliminated or combined with the Chinese schools in urban areas where Chinese are predominantly majority. So the Mongolian children of school age were forced to leave their communities to go to boarding schools in towns and cities. Um, According to the Chinese official statistics, in 2021, there were 2,087 boarding schools, including elementary and middle schools across southern Mongolia's 76 banners and counties. The total number of residential students in these boarding schools is 1.07 million. The proportion of residential schools in Mongolian concentrated areas is higher than in the Chinese concentrated areas. Some areas, such as Shilingol League and the Hengan League, the proportion of residential students is as high as 70 to 80%. So the boarding school system in southern Mongolia is actually it's an integral part of China's overall colonial policy of wiping out the language, culture, and identity of the entire Southern Mongolian population. Chinese occupation of Southern Mongolia is a typical settler colonialism, which inherently is genocidal in nature. For example, as early as the 1950s, the Chinese government kicked off a political witch hunt against the entire southern Mongolia in the name of anti-national rights movement to purge the Mongolian elites. Tens of thousands of Mongolians were persecuted. And in the 1960s through 1970s, the Chinese um, committed the first massive formal genocide in southern Mongolia. Entire southern Mongolian population was targeted by this genocide campaign that was carried out in the name of purging the members of separatist organization Inner Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party. The Mongolians were indiscriminately arrested, imprisoned, and tortured to confess that they were the member of national separatist group called Inner Mongolian People's Party, and the forced to provide the names of all of their family members, relatives, and even acquaintances as a member of the alleged separatist group. In many cases, under unbearable torture, those who exhaustively provided the names of the alleged members of separate crew even confessed that their pets, livestock, and household utensils were members of the Inner Mongolian People's Party. Estimated 100,000 Mongolians were tortured to death and a half million imprisoned, tortured, and permanently maimed. At the time, the total Mongolian population is in southern Mongolia was about 1.5 million. This means one out of three Mongolians were persecuted in this genocide campaign. The recently published book entitled A Chinese Rebel Beyond the Great Wall, The Cultural Revolution and Ethnic Pogrom in Inner Mongolia by Professor T.J. Chang, Ordin Boluk, and Mark Selden says, I quote, the death rates based on the published records ranged from 14 to 17 per thousand. These are the localities where the intensity of the violence would have ranked high among the most notorious cases in recent world history. So once the Chinese um, uh, government crippled the Mongolian population, reduced them in number. They started another new campaign. This is to erase the Mongolian traditional way of life. The two major policies were implemented. for this effort by the Chinese government. There were ecological migration and total ban over livestock grazing. With these policies, Chinese government forcefully displaced the entire Mongolian herders from their ancestral land to predominantly Chinese populated urban and agricultural areas. Nomadic way of life was accused of being backward way of life and blamed for the environmental degradation that in fact was caused by the Chinese intensive farming and mining practice. According to the Chinese State Council, China launched a massive resettlement project to resettle the remaining 1.2 million nomads by end of 2015. This means nomadic civilization that the Mongolians and other peoples, including Tibetans and the Kazakhs, maintained for thousands of years, were officially wiped out within the borders of the People's Republic of China by end of 2015. This alone amounts to a form of genocide, permanently and intentionally depriving a people and the population of their means of production and livelihood that are essential to their survival. So after taking away political rights, traditional way of life, now the Chinese government is targeting Southern Mongolians' last defense of national identity, that is language. Starting the September 2020, the Chinese government came up with another new policy called the second generation bilingual education, and whose goal is to completely wipe out Mongolian language, culture, and identity from Southern Mongolia. This sweeping campaign did not just stop at the removal of Mongolian language from all educational institutions. It is going further to erase the Mongolian culture and identity altogether as part of the overarching policy called firm inculcation of the Chinese nationality common identity. A region-wide massive training program has been launched immediately after the brutal crackdown of the Mongolian protests in 2020. From kindergartners to college students, from teachers to professors, from ordinary herders to party members, the entire Mongolian population is subjected to this massive training program. During the training, Mongolians are condemned for expressing their national feeling, condemned for singing Mongolian songs, wearing Mongolian clothes. Mongolians are condemned for not having enough number of Chinese friends and not being affectionate enough to the Chinese. Not only Mongolian students and teachers are banned from communicating in Mongolian among themselves, but also rural Mongolian herders are forced to speak in Chinese at home. The Mongolians are forced to condemn the so-called narrow nationalism and then embrace the superior the Chinese culture, Chinese language, and Chinese tradition. So this is what's happening in Southern Mongolia today. Um, I'm happy to answer some questions in the question in the section. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Engabatu, for the introductory remarks. It really gives us a picture of what Mongolians are going through in southern Mongolia. Next up, I'd like to bring up Alfadar. Alfadar is the president of Uyghur American Association. She is originally from Urumqi, East Turkestan, and came to the U.S. in 2000. She's a daughter of a distinguished Uyghur writer and journalist, and is actively engaging and supporting the Uyghur community and always advocating for human rights. And Elfie, we call Alfadar, has provided crucial insights and testimonies at UN side events, various branches of government, the House, Senate committees, and so forth, focusing on human rights. And so beyond her advocacy work, she has also committed to spreading awareness in universities and faith institutions across the world, talking about Uyghurs in East Turkestan. So without further ado, Alfadar.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Jamie. First, I want to say happy Mother Tongue Language Day to everyone. As you know, Uyghurs are also faced to but the genocide now. But this all started with the occupation of East Turkestan, 1949. Slowly, our lands were confiscated, our properties were taken, jobs were taken, and the Uyghurs' liveliness was destroyed. And then the years of decades of assimilation, discrimination, and it speed up recently. So once the General Secretary Xi took place, he wanted to have his final solution to eliminate Uyghurs. So eradicate the whole nation, whole culture, whole language. And they had 5 years, 10 years, 20 years plans that strategically they're executing. So I was born in Urumqi and I went to Uyghur school in 1980s. I was born in 1980. I had privilege to learn my own language in school with Uyghur teacher. Although we were learning Chinese as a second language, primary lessons were in Uyghur. However, like late 90s, they changed that to bilingual schools. So both language were taught at the same level. And that has changed by time to the whole in Chinese language school. So from what we hear from the community members recently, that now Uyghur schools doesn't exist. The schools learn Chinese and Uyghur language is 2 hours a week as an elective language. And then most Uyghurs are afraid to pick the Uyghur language for 2 hours a week, thinking they will get in trouble. And they try to teach themselves at home. However, most kids speaks Chinese as a mother tongue now, and they do not speak Uyghur. Their teachers ask children if they speak Uyghur in the house and what they talk about. So use kids as a spy to control this whole language and culture thing. So let's go to around 2016 when this international headlines may talk about the camps. As a mother, I was worried about the children's what's happening. Were they given to grandparents? How they are continuing, because like some families have both parents taken to the concentration camps. Then we learned that those children were also stolen and taken to basically the camps under different names, state-run orphanages, kindergartens, and boarding schools. And when Chen Chango came to our region, East Turkestan, there was already original plan of 5-year plan of getting 80% of children from age to 4 to 6, so 3-year age group, to kindergartens. And Chen Chuango accelerated this plan to achieve in 3 years, not 5 years, by 100%, not 80%. And he succeeded it. He basically focus on the kindergarteners first and take them to those schools with fully Chinese schools. Their kids were away from their family, away from their culture, their religious beliefs, and their basically the world, right? And they are stripped away from those values and basically raised as loyal, subjects to CCP. And this was very scary. When I heard this, I was worried about our future, because our children are our future. And unfortunately, we couldn't do much from here and overseas, but we were trying to monitor and follow what's going on. And then we heard there are many kindergartens are built around the concentration camps, around the forced labor camps, and the Chinese government were using propaganda messages saying, oh, the parents are learning, taking education, and kids are also educating in the kindergartens. And some propaganda message says kids live free and eat free, and so the parents are worry free at factories. Or another campaign says, now, like when dual parents are working comfortably and they can dance and attend other social events because their kids are being taken care of by the government. Basically, what's happening is government is becoming parents, and parents are taken to the camps, concentration camps, prisons, and factories. And there are some articles that mentions that even those children in the kindergartens calling their teachers mommy. And this is scary, that if you think about it, this is quite scary. And when we come to the boarding schools, as Adrian Zen's Associated Press report mentioned, in 2019 data, 900,000 kids were taken to the boarding schools. This is from grade 1 to grade 9. And that number probably multiplied by now. After 2020, there are not many data showing the amount of the students who are in the boarding schools. However, we can tell from one Kashgar region, 10,000 students were taken to the boarding schools, and that data is in 2020. And also it mentions the children in difficult circumstances are, better fit for the boarding schools, and they're all in the boarding schools, which means children in difficult circumstances means one or both parents are in the camps or prisons. So this is very scary, because China is also weaponizing the boarding schools to stall the future generation of our nation, basically. I also wanted to mention that government's propaganda clearly said in the Kashgar prefectures that striving to complete the 2020 goal of completing the construction of dormitory-based schools is that directive says the grades 4 and higher boarding is mandatory. So that is their plan. It's a mandatory boarding school programs, and government statistics shows that between 2017 to 2019, the number of boarding school students in primary and middle schools increased by 76.9%. That's quite scary. And those schools are ordering, like security guards are working there, ordering the surveillance system, video cameras. Some has the barbed wires around the schools, and they have a high-tech computerized security patrol management system that can be controlled with one button. And this shows that those children are not in school. They're also in camps, basically. So I don't have much time left. What we need to be careful is that our language, our culture, our religious beliefs, our future are at stake, and we have to do something about it. We in the diaspora trying to preserve our culture, our language, and have Uyghur schools. So the governments and the other, the civil society companies, I think they all need to support those schools in the diaspora. Also, I believe it's not too late. We can still help save these children. We can still stop this suffering of Uyghurs. We can help those children to unite their families. We just need to, keep discussing, sharing about this truth with the world, and then take more tangible actions, contact our government officials, our Congress members, senators, to pass a law that protects the Uyghur language, the Tibetan language, Mongolian languages, our culture, our beliefs, our values, so we can continue this that Chinese government trying to destroy it and eliminate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alvadar. Now we have all of our panelists on stage so that we can engage in a discussion. I think our audience would really like to understand what a life for Tibetan children, Uyghur children, and Mongolian children looks like, and folks have now talked about the real statistics of how many, the impact at a larger scale. But how much Tibetan, how much Mongolian, how much Uyghur language can they actually learn in school? China formally, technically introduced the so-called bilingual education policy in 2010 for all schools in all minority areas. But in theory, it sounds like you can do both languages and it sounds good, but in practice, we know that it's really different. And it's so bad that in every level, including the most rural areas, we're hearing that it's the language medium of instruction is in Chinese. So can you folks share more about the eliminationist policies that is aimed to, in Ajalhaja's words, wipe out our resistance?
Sure. Maybe I'll just go first and say I actually think starting with the kids is kind of the children is the best way to look at this. So I am a parent. I have twin 4-year-old boys and a 7-year-old boy. So exactly the age of these youngest kids in the system in Tibet, East Turkestan, and Southern Mongolia. Anybody who has a child, a niece, a nephew, a grandchild in their life at this age right now will know very well just how vulnerable they are, how much they want to be with their parents at all times, and how they are completely, even at 7 or 8 years old, 9, 10, they're still completely dependent on us for everything, and to imagine these tiny kids, my kids won't even sleep alone in their beds most nights because they're scared in the same house with us, to imagine these tiny kids being sent away, sleeping at night without their parents and not seeing their parents for, in many cases, months. In the case of a lot of the boarding preschools, from what we can understand, so we're talking 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, they might not see their parents for weeks, but certainly not Monday to Friday. My kids have never slept apart from me, but with maybe their father if I'm away for work. So the thought that these kids are spending night after night after night alone without their parents, wetting their beds, having, accidents in class, often with Chinese teachers when they first enter these schools that they can't even communicate with. We've heard many stories like this. It's a devastating emotional and psychological reality for these children. And that's what we are hearing for sure, but that their early days, weeks, months, these kids are just tormented, and so are their parents. And I guess what strikes me is we're not talking about a handful of kids in a handful of schools being sent away by their parents by choice. Like, there is no choice. The parents know in any of, because the political repression is so great, because the climate of fear is so intense in all of our lands, in all of our nations under the Chinese Communist Party, parents can't disagree. They can't protest. And if they do, and some do, some whole communities do, they face serious repercussions. And in a way, people know at this point that, so if you don't send your child, say, to the boarding preschool, that's all that's available to you in your whole area, you don't send them, then the government can take away, first of all, the right for that child and subsequent children of yours to go to school at all. And Tibetan parents want their children to have an education. All parents want their children to have an education and have a chance, a good chance, a fighting chance in this life. But at the same time, they will punish you. They will take away, say, some kind of social welfare or subsidies that maybe the nomadic people, or the vast majority of Tibetans live in rural areas and they're poor, and they'll take away this tiny little bit of money that they might get from the state that is meant to help sustain them. And jail, imprisonment, all of that is always there if you really go up against not just the policy in your area, but it's like going up against Beijing, because Beijing under Xi Jinping has highlighted this policy, of this ethnic schooling and the boarding schools. And, this is all part of a very top priority central government plan. So going up against it in any way is really a political act, and you can get in serious, serious trouble. So parents don't have a choice. Obviously, the kids don't have a choice. And then you're sending them away to live in a life where their entire day, and then thus their entire week, month, years of their life, their entire youth, is not with their family and their traditional values and practice of religion. Religion is banned. There's no religion in these schools. The religion is the Chinese Communist Party, political, ideological indoctrination. So there's no Buddhism for Tibetans who are deeply, deeply faithful people. It's a part of every bit of life, especially the transmission of culture and values to small children in a home. All of that is gone. It's all missing. They don't learn in Tibetan language, but they might have one Tibetan language class. I grew up in a system where I had one French class in Anglo-Canada, and that did not teach me French. That was not, the rest of my life was in English, and this one French class, while I appreciated it, was not enough. And for these kids to live their entire lives speaking Mandarin in Chinese in these schools, and then to have one Tibetan language class, the Chinese government calling this bilingual education is an absolute joke. And it's a fraud. It's a sham, and no one should for a second believe any of that. And I won't stop here and let the others speak to the life in the schools.
Elfrida, you want to go ahead?
Sure. As I mentioned, in East Turkestan, there is no longer bilingual schools, even though government says in some parts there is. The schools are all Chinese schools, and the Uyghur language is given 2 hours a week as an elective, as I mentioned. And the kids are, as Lada mentioned, away from their family. It means their characters are built by the school, which means by the government. So they're away from the love, the happiness, the trust, the compassion. They're away from those values, and then their religious beliefs and their culture. And Chinese government knew this very well. That's why when the camp opened and they started to detain Uyghurs, they started with the traditional bearers, the professors, the writers, the journalists, or the teachers, students. They backbone of the society were arrested first, so they cannot continue to teach and transform the Uyghur culture, Uyghur language to the future generation. And then the kids were taken to those boarding schools and kindergartens and orphanages. So this is very scary. Growing up in those kind of schools will leave lifelong psychological issues for those children. If I may give an example of the Kuchar family that Abdulwali Ayub interviewed, and I believe NPR also had the news about this. That family was, the kids were born in Turkey. They were Turkish citizen, but mom wasn't. And when they went back home for vacation in 2017, I believe, late 16, they were arrested, and the father was deported. Two kids, 4 years old and 6 years old, sent to 2 different camps, children's boarding schools, and mom was detained and taken to the concentration camps. After father's advocacy work and hard work, children were taken back to Turkey after 20 months. They were not even able to say bye to their mom because the mom was in the camps. And those kids were deficient in iron and calcium, and so like not malnourished basically. and traumatized. They couldn't sleep without the light on. They were screaming and having nightmares all the time. They were randomly asking permission to eat, permission to go to bathroom, or even speak, because they were punished in the kindergartens and boarding schools for everything they do wrong. Wrong meaning speaking their mother language, not following the orders, or speaking without asking permission. They were getting punished, so they were afraid of every little things. They were kicking, hitting each other. So that took so long. After schools, they were visiting psychologists, psychiatrists in Turkey, and still the father said they sleep with the lights on. So that's just one example of kids spending 20 months in those boarding schools. And imagine, at that age, they said they were punished in the basement, in the dark room. That's inhumane, and our children, our future, are facing this in our back home. And that's why, we need to take further action on this. Thank you.
So, uh, regarding the first question, the boarding school life, student life. As I mentioned earlier, in Southern Mongolia, boarding school started from the very first day of the Chinese colonial regime, but it intensified in the process intensified in the early 2000, when Chinese government started the new policy of the ecological migration, moving the Mongolian herders population from their land to the Chinese populated areas, urban and agricultural areas. So the schools are obviously all, rural schools are eliminated, and then they combined the schools in the city centers, or county centers, and then those young students, like elementary school students, they need to live in dorms by themselves. They did not have any skill of living independently, and obviously they didn't have enough attention, care, love from their parents. So their mental health deteriorated, and their academic performance dropped. These are the some of the consequences of those policies. So um, that's the first question about boarding school life in Southern Mongolia. The second question, to how much degree the Mongolians are able to learn, speak their language in schools. Um, I can say zero now. Right now is zero. Um, Starting 2000 September 2020, Chinese government launched the so-called second generation bilingual education. In fact, this policy was already there for many years, but this is a renewed new version of the policy. Under that policy, at the beginning, Chinese government said that, hey, we are just changing the medium of instruction from Mongolians to Chinese for only 3 subjects. Um, the Mongolians obviously knew that the Chinese always say something, do something another, right? So Mongolians knew that, and then Mongolian population stood up and staged a large scale protest. So after cracking down on the protest, Chinese government, of course, they started pushing this policy, and then last September, September of 2023, Chinese government officially announced to uh, change the medium of instruction from Mongolians to Chinese for all subjects in all schools. That means officially Mongolian language is no longer used as medium of instruction in any schools across Southern Mongolia officially. So and then Mongolian language is depending in some schools it's offered as a foreign language, and like maybe once or twice a week. And even Chinese government came up with some propaganda videos showing that, hey, some Chinese people have started learning Mongolian language in in their Mongolia university. People or Mongolians are laughing, you are just taking away our language from us, and then just uh, you know uh, fooling the world that the Mongolian language is learned by even Chinese. And so it was just very interesting there. So that's what's happening in Southern Mongolia. Is the Mongolian language is officially removed from all educational institutions. Not only that, but in the social life, even in the Mongolian language signs and the banners were removed from buildings, parks, and streets. So this is not just the campaign for removing language. This is actually to try to remove erase the entire culture and identity of the Mongolian people.
Thank you. Hearing this on International Mother Language Day, it brings me to this question of, is this genocide? And in the international community, there's often conversation of what constitutes a genocide, what doesn't. And just hearing from you folks about children being separated from their families, just the absolute erasure of language in every form and way of life in Tibet, in East Turkestan, and in Southern Mongolia. I want to pose that question to you folks. Is this genocide?
I mean, is it? Well, I always um, say this is genocide because the very original concept of genocide is it doesn't have to be genocide against the entire population, wipe out entire population at once. So it could be partial. It could be you don't have to kill all of the entire population. So this is for example, in Mongolian, if we look back at the Southern Mongolian history in the past 70 years, at least there were two major genocide campaigns took place in Southern Mongolia. The major one was in the late 1960s through early 1970s. Imagine that 100,000 Mongolians were tortured to death. Now people talk about genocide in Gaza and on all these things. Look at the numbers. The 100,000 Mongolians were tortured to death just for being who they are. They were just because they are Mongolians. And then, of course, they couldn't, wipe out. Chinese government could not entirely wipe out the Mongolian population. Mongolian population survived, and Mongolian people again thrived again despite all this repression. So now the Chinese government is changing their strategy, using another form of genocide, which is cultural genocide. The goal is the same. They want to just, no matter what forms of genocide the government of China use, is that goal is the same. They want to wipe you out, either physically, culturally, religiously, linguistically, and then just goal is to make you a plain, homogeneous Chinese population. That's what they're not hiding it. The policy is very clear. I mean, the international communities are not paying enough attention to what's happening in China, inter China. They are publicly saying that the all 55 so-called ethnic minorities, of course, they included us, Mongolians, Tibetans, Uyghurs as ethnic minorities. Okay, so this is another topic. So, but so Chinese government is publicly saying that now all citizens of the People's Republic of China is member of Zhonghua Minzu. Zhonghua means it's a tricky, term. It's Zhonghua is nothing but Chinese. Chinese. You just a lot of people say, "Oh, Zhonghua is multicultural." No, forget about it. No, they just want, it's just plain Chinese. They turn you into Chinese. Speak Chinese. In Southern Mongolia, the slogan is very clear: speak Chinese and become civilized person. What that means? If you speak Mongolians, if you speak Tibetans, Uyghurs, then you are not civilized persons. So that's what's happening in China. It's a just massive cultural genocide against these, especially these three nations, like occupied nations: Southern Mongolia, Tibet, East Turkestan. So I will always think this is absolutely a form of genocide. And then obviously in the world, I mean, recognized genocide is really just a very tiny fraction of the committed genocide. You don't have to wait for the world to tell you, hey, you're eventually qualified, recognized as genocide. Well, look at the Armenian genocide. They recognized after 100 years. What the use of recognizing the genocide after 100 years? So some in some sense, it's just international communities. This genocide, the very concept of genocide is weaponized, politicized. The whole world is just it's now became really became as a political term, pretty much. Just China is playing with this saying that, hey, look, we are not committing genocide, blah blah, all these things. So it's in fact, in reality, yes, it is genocide. It's genocide against Uyghur people, Tibetan people, Mongolian people in China.
Too. I want to bring in Elfie and Hanla into this to have your takes, and then I want to transition into our last 5 minutes into a different direction of this conversation.
Sure. Yes, the genocidal Xi wanted to eliminate Tibetans, Mongolians, Uyghurs, and wanted to build one homogeneous Han Chinese land. They don't want us. They're committing a genocide because we are the owner of that land, because we were occupied by the CCP. So yes, it is a genocide. And if you look at the Genocide Convention, I just opened it up, Article 2, the last element says forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And that's exactly what they're doing, transferring our kids to boarding schools away from their families, and they're re-engineering them to become a Han Chinese. And it is one part of the genocide, and they're committing all 5 parts of the genocide now. As you know, for Uyghurs, both Bush and Biden administration declared a genocide, and 11 other countries and parliaments followed it. But still, African countries, Muslim countries, some other countries are not calling it a genocide because they're getting incentives by the Chinese government. And they're being silenced and closing their eyes to the reality. But the reality is they're committing a genocide. They want to eliminate Tibetans, eliminate Uyghurs, eliminate Southern Mongolians. They were able to do that to other nations. They couldn't do it to us because we are a human that has faith, strong faith. We have the values. We live independently in our history. And I believe we have the hope also to fight against, and we will not be part of China, never. Thank you.
Yeah, China has a long history also in Tibet, over 7 decades of the People's Republic of China of trying to eliminate Tibetans through various different campaigns. And at one point, they just, bombed all of the monasteries and imprisoned people, labor camps, starvation, torture, everything to death. Now, I think we see China, at least with Tibet, because of international attention, because of the spotlight that His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan International Tibet Movement, along with partners and allies, have put on Tibet over the years. China is trying to sort of window dress. So it's like the Disneyfication of Tibet. So you have the monasteries and you have, Tibetans singing and dancing that you can see if you go and visit Tibet, and you will see the prayer flags flying. And you'll see Tibetan children in their propaganda in schools reciting Tibetan or, writing in Tibetan. But this is really just a very elaborate ruse, as only China, I feel like, can pull off. And everybody in the international community who's paying attention knows that the scope and the scale of the massive lies that China will tell, bald-faced lies to the world. And so that's what this is. It's like they don't have to march people into death camps in order to be committing genocide. And actually, as a Tibetan born and raised in Canada, I feel like when we were working on this report, this really stuck out to me in the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Essential History of Residential Schools, called A Knock on the Door, just in the introduction. Physical genocide is the mass killing of the members of a targeted group, and biological genocide is the destruction of the group's reproductive capacity. Cultural genocide is the destruction of those structures and practices that allow the group to continue as a group. States that engage in cultural genocide set out to destroy the political and social institutions of the targeted group. Land is seized, populations are forcibly transferred, and their movement is restricted. Languages are banned, spiritual leaders are persecuted, spiritual practices are forbidden, and objects of spiritual value are confiscated and destroyed. And, most significantly to the issue at hand, families are disrupted to prevent the transmission of cultural values and identity from one generation to the next. In its dealing with the Aboriginal people, Canada did all these things. In its dealings with Tibetans, in its dealings in the occupation of East Turkestan and of Southern Mongolia, China is doing all of these things right now. And under Xi Jinping, this has all intensified. So whatever language the Chinese Communist Party may use, development, modernization, whatever they want to call it, the truth of the matter is they are committing all of these crimes en masse. And the international community, in a way, is complicit by allowing China to get away with it sort of brazenly and openly. And that's why we're doing what we're doing now. We need to raise the alarm and say, as Tibetans can say, as China treats Tibet, we say, so goes the world. It's not that Tibet is some random far off issue. Like, China shows its true colors and always has in Tibet and in East Turkestan and in Southern Mongolia. And now look at what we have seen. The fall of Hong Kong, the death of civil society, the murder of civil society, whatever existed, that little bit of space in China itself. And now they are intending to eliminate and wipe out entire peoples, nations, cultures. They've essentially stolen all our children in this modern age, in kind of in front of the world, while creating some other alter story with propaganda. But this is happening, and it's not just. I think it's not just a question of what it means for us, but what does this say about the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist Party, and China's place in the world, and what China cares about or values or is willing to do or not do? I think what happens to us matters to everyone. And this is clear to us. This is genocide.
Mm-hmm.
If I may add one sentence, China studied the Genocide Convention, and they're committing a genocide with different tools and different ways around it. So yes, there's no mass bombings. They can't do that because they're more Han Chinese now, right? But they're doing organ harvesting. They're doing so many things, still killing massively in all nations, but not showing or giving, like with the control of intranet, not giving the evidence enough to the world.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thank you so much, all three of you. And I'm just looking at the time, but I can't let you go without asking this one last question that has a twofold. here's a situation that's absolutely awful for each of our respective nations. I asked the question to you of where do you find hope? Where is the light in this darkness? And alongside that, I know a lot of our audience is wondering what's something that they can do. And so, if there's one thing briefly you can mention that they can do, and also answer the question of where you find hope, and then we'll wrap up this panel.
I would say, oh, go ahead, think about it. I would just say share our report with your elected political leaders, local and federal, and tell them to speak out and say something to protest what's happening inside Tibet and to Tibetan children, to the Chinese government. We need to put a light on the, China's trying to keep this all under wraps, hidden, obscured. So the key is first and foremost, expose it. And then, we build our pressure and our campaigns from there. And I would say the hope for Tibetans is Tibetans in Tibet. Tibetans in Tibet are still fighting. Why do we know about what's happening in spite of unbelievable threats to their lives and safety? Tibetans inside have managed to get this story out. And all those kids are still there. And the policy of boarding preschools has only really been implemented since 2016. It's too long, but we still have time. This is not over. I say anyone who believes that wishes we could turn back time and change what happened in the residential boarding school system in Canada or here in boarding schools in the US to Indigenous Aboriginal people in Australia, Tibetan culture, language, all of it's still there. The essence of Tibetans as a nation, as a people, everything is there still. It's under threat, but it's there, and we need to fight for it. This doesn't have to be.
I can go next. Where do I find hope? First, I think those children raised up like Han Chinese will still face discrimination because they look Uyghur. They don't look Chinese, right? They will act like Han Chinese, but they are different, and they will face discrimination and then realize their origin, why that's happening to them, and that freedom fighting spirit will be in them. I hope this is going to continue. And I mean, another hope is the Uyghurs in the diaspora. That my US-born kids, they know how to write and read Uyghur language. They're trying to learn their traditional instruments or cultural dance or, learning. I think if we pay attention and fund and support with different resources, the children of our future in the diaspora can learn, continue, and preserve their language, their culture, their identity. And one day we will be free, we will have our independence, we will go back, and then we will reunite with our people. So that is my hope.
So yes, in terms of hope, yes, there are two reasons why I'm hopeful. One, for example, in Southern Mongolia, despite the Chinese authorities' heavy-handed crackdown and repression, the Mongolians stood up in 2020 is in a massive scale. It's just like an unprecedented level of coordination and strength to stand up against the Chinese policy of wiping out their language, culture, and identity. So we still have hope that people will continue to resist. And internationally also, I'm very hopeful that recently, especially in the Palestinian issue and the International Court of Justice is working on the issues. Like, for example, I was watching some news yesterday, and Israel was condemned for, questioned whether Israeli occupation of Palestine is illegal or illegal. So I think we three nations should work together to bring China to the International Court of Justice. their occupation of our three nations is absolutely illegal, absolutely illegal. This should be, this issue should be brought to the light, and then to the attention of the whole world. I mean, it's not easy process. I know but we still, I think, world is gradually waking up, and then hey, there are actually genocides that are taking place, ethnic killing things are taking place. So China is acting as now is like condemning U.S. for yesterday. I think Chinese government is condemning U.S. for vetoing the UN Security Council's resolution, blah blah, and then acting as China is peacemaker. China is peace lover. Come on, I mean, we have to really, educate the international community about what exactly China is doing in these occupied three nations.
Yeah, definitely starts with exposing the lies and the propaganda that the Chinese government continues to feed the international community. I want to thank the three of you for all your powerful insights. Sincere gratitude for the work that you do every single day in the times of active erasure of our communities, our peoples. This only makes sense that we are working together. And so for everyone watching, this is an intentional conversation curated for you folks to see how much work there is to be done and how much you can do to engage in this movement. And so I want to wrap up this panel by saying that this is just the beginning of our conversation on February 21st, which technically marks the International Mother Language Day, where folks are celebrating their mother tongue, but Tibetans in Tibet, Uyghurs in East Turkestan, and Mongolians in Southern Mongolia are not able to, while their children are being ripped apart from their families. So thank you so much for everyone joining us and listening. Please stay connected, as folks have already mentioned, read the reports and stay connected with us. And we will be hosting more conversations with experts to tell you about the realities of Tibetans in Tibet, Uyghurs in East Turkestan, and Mongolians in Southern Mongolia. So thank you so much again to Jenang, to all our expert panelists.
Sachin.